Okay, cool. So this is our first meeting. We just wanted to go through a couple of things. We've already done our introductions, some familiar faces here on the slides. Victoria Kelly, our secretary and medical student liaison, couldn't be here today, and neither could Shreya Desai, but they will both be with us in DC. They're also members of the e-board. So really along the way, if you have any questions, I'll be putting our general SciPol email in the slides, which we will be sharing with you after today. We'll also share the recording. But feel free to reach out to any of us individually if you're more comfortable chatting with us about anything, or if you have questions along the way. But yeah, this is our e-board. And like Emma said, we will be holding elections for a new e-board in the coming year. So if you're interested in any of these positions or learning more, again, just feel free to reach out. So generally, our trip is going to be Wednesday, July 19th through Thursday, July 20th. Like we mentioned, we'll be visiting with lawmakers, and this is where we'll be staying. So Lana, I'll share this. This is a link to the hotel where Hillary has already booked us some rooms. And we'll be sending more details about room assignments in the future, but we will be staying in DC. I just put together a little list of things for folks who are thinking about what to bring. I think maybe the most important and time sensitive thing is your SciPol Detroit t-shirt. Hopefully everybody has the navy blue one with the white square block lettering that we wore to Lansing. If you don't have that, please reach out to Katie and she can coordinate a time where you can pick that up. We plan on wearing that one day with a blazer and nice trousers or nice pants on the Hill. And then the second day, we would just encourage you to bring a professional, sort of business professional clothing to wear when we meet with lawmakers. These are just some other things that when I was thinking back on the trip from last year, I think these are important to grab. If anybody has an old Metro card that we used to use the Metro to get around the city last year, feel free to bring that, and then you can just upload more money onto it this time around. Folks who've been on the trip before, if you have any other thoughts of important things to bring that I may have missed, please drop them in the chat. I think generally something to consider is that it's going to be really hot and likely humid while we're there. It was pretty hot and humid when we were there in June of last year, and now we're going even later in the summer in mid-July. So please keep that in mind when you're figuring out what you want to wear, and know that we will be outside walking around from place to place pretty often. So this is just a quick schedule I put together. I 100% know that this will change at some point, but generally Wednesday we will be leaving Detroit very early on a flight that I'm going to talk about in a second. We'll likely be landing in DC again early morning, and we probably won't start meeting with lawmakers until around 9:30 or 10 a.m. This is really up to Doug, I guess, and or really the lawmakers and Doug's coordinating skills. But when we can start meeting with them is on their schedule for sure. So we will be flexible on that. We will have lunch together on that day after some meetings. We'll likely have meetings in the afternoon, and then dinner that evening as a group together. And that's something that our e-board will be coordinating. So if anybody has, I guess, dietary preferences, we will also be making sure to ask about those in the coming days. But Thursday, we'll likely be checking out of the hotel early morning, then do some more meetings, again, a lunch, and then more meetings. Or we're also in the works thinking about potentially meeting with some researchers at agency offices or a Capitol tour or other things in the works, which we'll also speak a little bit about. But again, luckily, we have Doug here to help us sort through and organize all of these meetings, but it probably won't be closer to the week that we go when we have this schedule really finalized and we know exactly who we're speaking to. Those of you who have been on this trip before know that you have to have some flexibility. It's the same thing like it was in Lansing as well, where lawmaker schedules change very quickly all the time. So we will just have to kind of roll with that. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for preparing as far in advance as we can, and we will really keep you up to date on everything as soon as possible. And then Thursday, there will be some time in the evening where it's likely you'll have some free time. So last year, I know a few of us met up with friends who were in the DC area. Some folks went to a museum. together as a group. So if there's anything you're like really excited to do that we may not get to on Wednesday, you can consider you might have some time to do that Thursday evening. But our plan is to leave DC at around 10 p.m. Again on a flight, and then we will be landing pretty late in Detroit Thursday evening. We'll also be sending out a poll to figure out potential carpooling options to make sure that everybody can make it to the airport on Wednesday and then get home Thursday evening with little hassle. So like I mentioned, we're thinking about some other activities for this trip. Doug had the great idea of meeting with agency offices. So I think particularly as we were discussing, the members' interest, your interest for this trip, but the EPA was something, the Environmental Protection Agency was something that came up as potentially a meeting of interest. I know we also wanted to do a Capitol tour last summer that we weren't able to quite organize, so there's a possibility for that. Also potentially touring the National Academy of Sciences or meeting with Research America funders who actually did support us with grant funds to get to DC this year, or potentially watching a session. So these are some other kind of extra things that we will be doing on top of meeting with lawmakers, potentially. We certainly, unfortunately, won't have time to do all of these things, but if there's anything that really appeals to you that you would love to see happen, or if you have other ideas, please feel free to put them in the chat now or email any of us later if you're feel really strongly about doing any of these things. We'd love to make sure that everybody's interests are being met as well as possible, but some of the stuff is a little out of our hands as well. I know agency scheduling those meetings and scheduling a Capitol tour, again, might not be the simplest thing, but we know that Doug's there to lead us in whatever we can make happen. So the flight details. This is something that we really wanted to touch on because unfortunately the prices of the flights have been going up recently, as they do. But this is the planned flight that we are going to take to DC, the leaving again Wednesday early in the morning from Detroit to DCA, and then coming back to Detroit late Thursday night on the 20th. Currently the price is $334, and we will be able to reimburse at minimum $281 for all of your tickets. We were hoping that we'd be able to reimburse everyone's total flight costs and their hotel costs, but we aren't quite sure if that's going to happen, given the number of folks who were interested in the trip and the grant money that we were able to secure for this trip. Unfortunately, that money hasn't actually been sent to our account as of today. Please, e-board members, correct me if I'm wrong on that. Maybe something changed overnight, but we will be reimbursing you likely through Venmo. I think that's the easiest way for us to share money with you all. But if you are able to right now, and I'm actually going to put out a poll really quickly to make sure we have data on this, but if you're in a financial situation where you could book the flight in the next 7 days, we would ask that you do so, just because we want to make sure that we're, able to get as many tickets at this price right now as possible, so that hopefully the price doesn't go up in the future. If you're not in a financial situation to do that, that is totally okay. Please just answer, anonymously, or it's not anonymous on the poll, but we won't share these information with everybody, just the e-board, and then we can reach out to you with other options if that's easier for you. So please don't feel as though you have to purchase the ticket this week out of your own pocket. But if you're financially in a situation to do that, please do. And then forward us just your flight confirmation, and we will be reimbursing you all with at least, again, that $281 as soon as possible. So I think, how many of us are here today?
15 on the call.
Thank you, Katie. So 11 answered. We'll give it another couple seconds, but thank you everybody for answering the poll. I think I'll end it now. It looks like folks are kind of wrapping up. Okay. So back to the slideshow. Thank you all for answering that question. Anybody who asked to get more details, we will be reaching out to you after the meeting today. But okay, so then as far as topics go, thank you everybody for filling out that survey that we sent out a few weeks ago, but maybe no surprise to folks, but there was real interest in topics related to health equity and environmental justice. Something that we think kind of checks all the boxes for folks who were interested in advocating for topics related to health equity is the Black Maternal Health Momnibus package. This may sound very familiar to folks because this was on our list of advocacy topics as when we visited DC in 2022. This package was reintroduced last month, and it focuses on improving maternal health in a number of different ways. I think really there's a part of this package that touches on every perspective that you all shared with us that you were interested in advocating for related to health. So social determinants of health is touched on with this package of bills, improving care for veteran mothers and incarcerated mothers, training perinatal medical practitioners, funding new tech that addresses maternal health, and then even there's a bill which I didn't realize was added this year. It was about protecting mothers and children from the impacts of climate change across the country. So there is this wonderful website that I did link here that you'll be able to access when I share the slides that actually walks you through all of the different bills that are in this, what I believe is 13 bill package. So they each are focused on something in particular. So if this is something of interest to you, we will be sending out a sort of summary brief on this topic pretty soon that will help you create your talking points. But if you want to do some research today or before we send that out, I'd recommend checking out that website. It's a really great resource. The other potential topic that we were focused on is this environmental justice piece, and we haven't particularly narrowed down to one bill of interest, but Doug had this really wonderful idea about actually advocating for rollout plans that use funds from the recently enacted Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Acts or the Inflation Reduction Act, and encouraging lawmakers that we meet with on your opinions, your expert opinions for plans on basically how those funds can be spent in Detroit or more broadly across Michigan. This is an option that I think could appeal to some of our folks who are true experts in their fields, particularly related to air pollution and safe drinking water access. If anyone on the call today or who's watching the recording feels that they would be comfortable and confident creating talking points related to rollout plans for funds for these acts that are sort of allocated to the state of Michigan to address these issues, we can share some materials that Doug shared with us. And we just want to make sure that along the way you are well informed, that your talking points are well supported, because I think this is something that those of us who are experts on these things and who have, you know, community contacts and have a good perspective on how these situations are across the state, that's something you could address. But for those of us who might be more comfortable just, again, advocating for a bill that more broadly relates to topics in environmental justice, we're still hoping to find a bill that fits that. Because I know all of us, like myself included, I don't feel like I'm an expert in air pollution across Detroit or Michigan, and I wouldn't be in a situation where I could really speak to how to spend those funds effectively or most effectively. So we're going to have some time at the end of this meeting to talk about this, and we'd love to hear ideas if other folks have bills of interest or topics in mind. So just a little overview. If folks want to speak on one of these issues when we're in DC, we would love to have you do so. Basically, what we would ask of you or require of you all is to participate in all of the workshops leading up to the Advocacy Day. This can be like you're doing today, attending this meeting or watching the recording that we send out later. We will ask you to practice your talking points with us in either our meeting next week or the following week. If you aren't able to attend either of those meetings, then you can record yourself delivering your talking points, and then send it to us so that we can give you feedback. Really, we just want to encourage folks to make sure that you are using your background as a scientist to provide evidence to support your arguments, and make sure that you're using correct etiquette when delivering your talking points. If you aren't interested in delivering talking points when we're at DC, you certainly can still participate without speaking. That's totally fine. I believe that the way we're going to operate the trip this year is that we will have 2 or 3 folks talking in each meeting. So everyone will likely have the opportunity to speak twice. Is maybe that's how it worked last year in DC. That's potentially how things could work again this year, is you deliver 2, or you lead, I guess, 2 conversations on your topics with lawmakers. But if you're not interested in doing that, then you can still kind of come along, and we would love to really have you there. So how to write talking points, I think for those of you who maybe this is your first time doing this, or you want more structure, we would encourage you to research your bill. Like I mentioned, we'll be sending out like 1-page briefs on all of the bills as soon as we can, but you can start doing some outside research on these topics after our meeting today if you'd like. We would encourage you to consider your story and how your personal anecdotes or your personal life has related to your perspective as a scientist, or your perspective on the piece of legislation that you're advocating for. And again, please use data. Do your research, find statistics that ground this conversation in fact. We find that that will be really convincing for lawmakers. It will lead to a really successful conversation around these topics if we're able to have scientific evidence to back up whatever we're advocating for. We would encourage you to write these things down and bring them to the meeting. We know it's difficult to have numbers, at least for some of us, like myself, have numbers in the forefront of your mind to pull up as soon as you need to in conversation. So having those on a note card or a notebook can be really helpful. Another thing that can be really helpful is to include data on the financial impacts of the legislation. We find that that can be very, again, successful to use in these conversations. And practice is really important. So we'd like for everyone to be able to deliver their talking points in less than 4 minutes, to make sure that we have time for everyone who wants to speak in these conversations to be able to share their voice. And we don't want it to be like a speech. I think that's something we mentioned here. I already did this one, sorry. Sorry, I think my slides are a little messed up. Oh, wait, no. Never mind. But basically, we want them to be more like bullet points. So that's our end goal. To help your writing process, you can write out like a speech and then create an outline that basically has these 4 key points where you introduce yourself, you introduce your bill, then you explain your personal connection to the legislation, and then explain why supporting this legislation is important for other folks in the lawmakers' areas of governance. Again, we want this to be more of a conversation. For folks who are in Lansing this year, that's what we're hoping to replicate in DC, those sort of fluid conversations that we were able to ground with our scientific perspectives. For folks who were in DC last year, we're kind of trying to build or step away from, I guess, that delivering a 3-minute speech and then waiting for the staff members or the lawmakers to respond. So we want it to be a little more interactive. So more practice and just doing a lot of research, I think, ahead of time allows us to be comfortable enough to have those types of conversations. Okay, so this is an example that I don't expect anyone to read right now. It's far too many words on any PowerPoint slide, but we have Katie here today, and she's going to give an example of how she drafted her talking points and delivered them in Lansing. So I will stop sharing for now, and Katie, you can take it away.
Alrighty, share my screen. Okay, can you guys all see this fine? Yes. Okay, perfect. So yeah, kind of speaking to what Brenna said, like we're kind of trying to shy away from what went on in DC last year. I think everyone did a wonderful job. However, I feel like the talks were very, you know, kind of well written, but sounded a little bit rehearsed. And I think, you know, this year in Lansing, we kind of had that learning curve that we overcame where it was more of a casual conversation, a little bit more informal conversation with these lawmakers. And honestly, I believe that's a much more effective way to communicate with them and kind of get our point across. And so I'm just demonstrating an example of a bill I talked about when we went on our Lansing trip this year. So in terms of like how to draft exactly what you want to say, I'm kind of going to follow that exact outline that Brenna had just shared with you. So when I was in Lansing this past year, I know a lot of you were in Lansing with us, and it's nice to have you back again. We talked on a few different bills. The bill that I focused on specifically was addressing lead exposure in children living in the state of Michigan. And so what I did is first initially start with research. So as Brenna mentioned, in the next like week or so, you guys will get basically these policy briefs essentially on the bills that we end up focusing on. And so from there, you can kind of start to craft your own conversation that you'd like to have, or at least your own talking points that you'd like to focus on when you meet with these legislators or their respective staffers. And so I spoke on a Senate Bill 31, which was addressing lead. This background information that I have highlighted, this was actually in the brief that we supplied to members. And then from there, I also had some talking points that were included in this policy brief. So again, I think you guys can expect to look forward to, you know, a general background surrounding the bill or the particular legislation topic. And then you'll also have some talking points incorporated from the e-board that we think might be useful in your conversation with lawmakers. However, you don't need to focus on these talking points if you yourself are more familiar with the topic, or if you'd rather give your own anecdotal experience and then follow that up with some data. By all means, like craft your talking points to whatever you're most comfortable with. But what I did in terms of just researching, I essentially went on Google or Google Scholar, looked up the bill, obviously did some research on michigan.gov. You can do this as well at the federal level for your particular bill, if that's what you're speaking on, to get a little bit more of an understanding on it. And from there, I kind of just jotted down really important key points that I could pull out of the bill that need to be addressed, as well as some data that supports why that's so important to be incorporated into that bill package. So that's kind of what these highlighted sections are. I'm sorry, I'm kind of crazy when I take notes. And then I just had a few bullet point notes underneath. So this was all essentially my process for data collection. Again, just getting the policy brief from the SciPol e-board was really useful. Understanding what sponsors or potential co-sponsors are on that bill might be helpful as well, which we will also include. And then from there, I kind of just jotted down my own notes that I pulled off of Google. I think really when you're researching, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is just making sure that your resources are valid resources. So like going through, you know, peer-reviewed papers might be useful, even just pulling up some abstracts might be useful. Pulling things out of news articles that are reputable, like The Conversation, where scientists contribute, I think could be useful. So gathering that data, I think, is probably going to be the most time-consuming part, but it is a fun thing to do when you're really invested in that particular topic. And so once I gathered enough data where I felt like I, you know, could speak on this issue somewhat from an expert perspective, then I went ahead and created my layout for my speech, which essentially just follows those bullet points that Brenna had mentioned. So I started with introducing myself, introducing SciPol Detroit. I would think that within every group, you don't need to do that. We'll probably have one e-board member appointed per conversation that will talk about SciPol Detroit. So for any members that are outside of the e-board, don't worry about introducing SciPol. But again, I think it is important to, you know, introduce yourself, talk about what you're doing at Wayne State, whether you be an undergrad, graduate student, medical student, etc. And then I also included, I don't know if it was on Brenna's general outline, but I think it could be beneficial if you'd like to do this. I recognized where they stood or what their stance was on that particular bill. So if they support that package, i.e. if they're a co-sponsor of that package, I thank them for their support, which, if you can kind of think about it, might lead your conversation in a slightly different direction. So if you're speaking on like the Momnibus bill, for example, with someone who's already a co-sponsor on the bill, you might be thanking them for their support, kind of just giving a brief breakdown as to why you think that bill is so important to you and why you're passionate about it. as compared to someone that you might meet with that might not necessarily support the package. And in these meetings, now you're looking for their support. So again, just keep in mind that your directions might go, or your conversations might go a little bit differently depending on the person that you're meeting with, and if not, they support that bill. So I recognize that. And then as Brenna mentioned, I just went into the bill with my key talking points. And so I have some of them listed here. I would like to say in every conversation I had, I don't think I brought up every single talking point. So again, like, you can kind of determine what you want to say per meeting and really just, make it your own thing. You don't have to feel like you're like needing to say every single thing that's listed on your talking points. Just let the conversation flow. You might get some questions from legislators that might be useful to, follow up with while you're going through your conversation and your talking points. And so from there, once I finished with my talking points and, left a little room to converse with the lawmakers if they had any questions, then I just thanked them for their time. We probably will be leaving them resources as well. These resources would be, these policy briefs that we're going to make up for all of you. So just thanking them for their time, mentioning that we're going to leave behind this resource package, and then ending your portion of the meeting. And again, you can always follow up with, even if you yourself have a particular question you'd like to ask the lawmaker. I think that that's totally welcome and fair, as long as we're being respectful of everyone's time. So yeah, that's how I crafted my speech. I think most of the people on this call have either been to DC or have been to Lansing. So I think, you guys that have had this experience are already off on a good foot. For those of you who haven't had this experience, don't stress it. It's a wonderful experience to have. You're going to really appreciate the fact that you did this afterwards. And if you guys need any help at all, obviously you'll get that help in these resources throughout these meetings that we're going to have with you all. But also do not hesitate to reach out to the e-board if you have any additional questions, or just want to send us a draft of your talking points that we can look over. We'd be more than happy to do that with you. All right, Brenna, I'm going to end my screen share.
Thanks, Katie. Yes, I just am going to share my screen briefly again, just to go over our last few slides, and then we'll kind of get into our group discussion. So this, I just wanted to include in the slideshow to make sure everyone's aware of things to keep in the back of your head when we're meeting with lawmakers. We already touched on dressing professionally, and Katie, I think, did a great job of mentioning to thank staff members and lawmakers for their time and to acknowledge whether they are, I guess, generally in support of the bill or potentially not already. Just normal stuff. Please don't interrupt anybody while they're speaking, whether it be a fellow member or a lawmaker. Please avoid speaking about topics beyond the scope of the bills that we're advocating for. I think this is something that we get excited about as passionate scientists, but we want to try and keep our arguments centered and focused on the bills, basically so that the lawmakers have an easy time remembering why we were there while we spent the time in their office. And to personalize your talking points to appeal to each lawmaker. Once we figure out who exactly we have meetings scheduled with, then we will send out a breakdown of who exactly will be leading the conversation with each of the lawmakers. We hope that we could do this at least a week in advance of going to DC, but at that point, if there's anything that you can incorporate that might really appeal to certain lawmakers about, your stance on the topic, that's always really encouraging to do that. So these are just, things to remember when you look back at these slides in the next couple of weeks. And the last thing, just some next steps. Like Katie mentioned, we'll be sending out our bill briefs as soon as possible. So please look out for those in your inbox in about a week. You can start drafting your talking points at this time if you'd like, but our next workshops, which will be Friday, June 16th, and then Friday, June 23rd, again from 10 to 11. We will have Doug here with us to help us as we practice our talking points. He will kind of be acting as a lawmaker to ask questions, to maybe attract attention to the weaker points in your talking points or things like that. But really, it's just to get some practice for everybody in their talking points. He's certainly not going to argue with you or put you on the spot too much unless you're really looking for a conversation like that. But it's really just to make sure that you get some feedback on your talking points. Generally, we have really positive things to say because I think everyone has really done a really great job when we've done this in the past, but it's always good to have these practices available. If you can't make either meeting, please let us know before that last workshop for practice points on June 23rd. We already talked about booking flights, and we'll be reaching out to folks who answered that they would like to hear about other options at the time. But for now, we can open up the conversation to everybody to really talk more about potentially that environmental justice piece or just general thoughts about talking points. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, bring it back to everybody. But yeah, Doug, if you, I know this has been really fast. Doug just started working with Wayne State, everyone, like last month, I think. So
Yeah,
we are really, my gosh, putting him on the spot and asking a lot of him, and he's been doing a really excellent job in supporting us. But if there's anything that you wanted to chat about related to some potential bills, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it's not a lot of work. You guys are making this super easy, and you're clearly on top of it. And the experience and skills is really showing. Yeah, you did a great job going over everything in the talking points. The only thing I'd add in there that might be worthwhile is actually saying where you're from. So, if you're from the district, if not, but we're in Michigan, that's always really helpful. And an added piece of that, but everything else was right on, spot on, with all that. So really great. Couple ideas to throw out there. So done some digging, and I've got a couple of feelers out there, but one bill that I think jumps to the top of the list is the Environmental Justice for All Act. I haven't dug into it too much, but it's similar to the omnibus, where it has a bunch of different provisions about environmental justice and addressing the inequities in the system, and how do we really get at and provide support to communities that have been suffering from environmental impacts. So that's worth looking into. The House bill is Sleeve and Canada on it, but the rest of the delegation is not on, and there's no Michigan members on the Senate bill. It just came out, I believe, last month. So it's environmental justice for all. I can send you guys the link. That's helpful. And then the other one was trying to look on PFAS. I know there's a lot of legislation. There's a lot of interest. It's been a really big popping story. It's another one within the environmental realm that would be good to look at. So I'd encourage you to look around, see if you can find something, and let me know, and happy to help and provide support. The other one, and just to kind of go back to some of the earlier discussions, and was actually one on student aid, and this is actually the Pell to Grad Act. Just want to throw it out there just because I know you all are grad students. So this one would actually extend the number of semesters that Pell's eligible to 16 from current 12. So it actually extended to grad students as well. Just another one, just a thought, just to add to the mix. But I think those are the ideas that I've been digging around on. But obviously, you guys are doing the advocacy, so you've got to be ones that you care about, you're passionate about, and so I'll leave it up to you to tell me what you want to do.
Thank you, Doug. Those all sound really interesting to me. I'd love to hear from anyone else on the call. I know that we were kind of split almost 50-50 between folks who are interested in advocating for health equity or environmental justice topics. We did send out that interest form for the student aid package, like Doug mentioned, and there was maybe one or two folks who were interested in that topic. So if those folks feel really strongly about that advocacy topic, we can have a conversation about still letting you have that experience of advocating on potentially that Pell to Grad Act. But yeah, just anybody on the call right now who has any opinions on those things, we'd love to hear from you.
I think that kind of having that bill for the environmental justice for all, especially for those of us that aren't super comfortable talking about specifically the rolling out process and stuff like that, it kind of gives us a good anchor of so we can have because I remember in the last time, it's okay to say I don't know, but sometimes you don't want to say, I don't know, but it's kind of talking about like a bill itself rather than something that, and especially since a lot of us have practice talking about a specific bill and we kind of know how to navigate that, I think that would be beneficial to have something to kind of anchor us. And then that can kind of lead into the other points of like the rolling out plans, because obviously you can't have a bill without a good rolling out plan. It's not going to be effective in that sense. So I think having an anchor kind of like that would be nice.
Thanks, Mark. I think that's a great point. I think I'm in total agreement with you, honestly. I know there are some folks on the call who are experts in potentially rollout plans for some of those other bills that we mentioned. And I saw Clara maybe speak up about that in the chat. So we can share those resources with you, Clara, about the Infrastructure Reduction or Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure and Jobs Act about, how you can structure your arguments based on those funds available. But I agree. I think we can do some more reading about the Environmental Justice for All Act, but if it was just introduced last month too, I think that could be maybe good timing for us in July to jump on that and start chatting about that. I'm an ecotoxicologist, so PFAS is on my mind all the time, but I understand that I don't know if there's anybody else on the call right now who are interested in those forever chemicals, PFAS or PFOAs.
I'd be interested, Brenna.
Okay.
I wouldn't mind talking about that or environmental justice. I think that's the direction I'm leaning towards.
Cool. Then I think we could do some reading as an e-board on those topics, and members on the call, members who are listening to the recording, if you also want to do any reading and let us know if you have, things that you really are passionate about speaking on, we really want to hear that. We want to make sure that this experience allows you to make your voice heard and make your opinions known and your scientific evidence for these types of things available. So keep us in the loop, please. Is anybody on the call interested with the Pell to Grad Act? Because that is something I think we can consider moving forward if folks are really interested in speaking on that.
If we need it, if we really wanted to talk about it at DC, I can do it. But if not, like if we're okay with, but if it's like something that we're like, no, we should have it, I'm fine with doing that. I have some leeway.
Which one would you prefer, Mark? Do you have like a top choice?
I mean, the environmental justice, I just spent basically my whole last semester doing a bunch of I took environmental health and classes like that. So that's fresh on my mind. But when I was in Lansing, I talked about education and establishing a school of public health. So both of them would work for me. So it really does not matter to me.
Okay, good to know. Anyone else?
I'll just mention that one thing to keep on the radar. And actually, Doug might know now more about updates to this than I do, but with the recent legislation to avoid the budget default, there was a $500 million cut in funding to NIH that was included in there. It was one of the Republican-led appropriations that was kind of demanded in order to push the legislation forward. There's now the bill will go to appropriations, so there's still a chance that that will not happen and that things will change in terms of budget allocations. But I just wanted to highlight that for people. And my last updates of this were at the beginning of the month, so I'm not sure what the status of that is now. But I think it's important to be aware of cuts for funding for scientific research that might be in place. Dick Durbin is one of the senators who's leading the charge against that to get those funds added back in. So I just wanted to make folks aware of that.
No, it's good. And there's all sorts of scary things going on with the budget these days. It's we can talk about between the caps and the rescissions and what might happen given the House is now basically trying to got most of the non-defense discretionary funds. So yeah, that's going to be a point of topic. I mean, and something that folks could very well advocate on if there's interest there. And last point though, it's going to be hard to say because it's got to go through appropriations. We don't know where the numbers going to end up, but
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, that's something I wasn't aware of, so that's really good to keep in mind. Yeah, I think that's another thing to consider as well. That's something, I guess, last time we were in DC with that America Competes Act, I know a lot of us felt really strongly and passionate about advocating for increased funding for scientific research. So just to make sure that that isn't lost, I think would be something we could all personally relate to. So we have things to think about, but like, which is good. That's why we wanted to have this conversation today.
and it might be something, you can easily weave into the conversation too. So when you're talking about, SciPol and introducing yourselves and what you guys are doing, bring up the need for, continued federal investment in basic science research. I think that's, something you can easily throw in there and weave in without having to, necessarily do a separate thing on it.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's something we certainly could do no matter what we end up focusing on for the bills. Yeah.
I can send like a quick budget update if that's helpful, just so you can have a sense of where it's at and the mess that is federal budgeting.
Yeah, that would be really helpful because I was just thinking that like I wouldn't quite know where to start. So start looking at all of those things. Thank you, Doug. I think we'd really appreciate that. And we can share all these resources too that Doug, you share with us. We can share those with the broader group on top of the sort of summary briefs that we'll create before we send out. I know we have about 10 minutes left before this meeting is over. Does anyone have any questions about how things are going or just general things to expect for the trip?
So one quick one, kind of housekeeping. So the new hotel you're staying at, the Holiday Inn Express, that's in Northwest, right?
They're around Mount Vernon Triangle.
Got it. Perfect. So I think I might adjust who we're hanging out with that morning instead of MSU. I'll probably reach out to University of Michigan or the state of Michigan's federal office and see if we can do the drop and pre-brief there. Just keep that in mind. So as we're getting ready for it, just because it's in the right quadrant of the city and we're not coming all the way from the other side when we get to the end of the day. So that's helpful.
Perfect. Thank you for keeping that in mind, Doug, and making those connections. I guess with that, while we have you on the call, is there anything that we can do anything else we can do to support you in planning all of this? Because we know there is a lot on your plate.
No, this is good. I think I have a sense of what you guys want to talk about, which means I can get the outreach going. So I think from now, unless you tell me otherwise, I'm gonna go with blanket maternal health and justice, environmental justice, and start lining everything up. Because it's a month, so we should be in good shape. But we'll start planning all that out.
Awesome. Yeah, and if anybody on the call, or Doug, if you have other news about potential other activities like that Capitol tour or agency meetings, we'd love to hear if anyone is particularly interested in any of those things we brought up today. Or you can let us know later, put it in the chat or whatever. Yeah. I'm with you, Claire. I think an agency meeting would be very cool. But we want to make sure, yeah, everyone's interested in being met with the trip. But I guess, Doug, if that's something that can happen, there's interest, but we understand, yeah, if there's other things that we can make work.
I'll work on it. I guarantee that we can try.
For sure, we understand. Yeah, everything with this includes flexibility, which we are happy to do.
Since you
Okay.
guys are up in Mount Vernon Triangle, a suggestion, since we're gonna try to pick up one of your meals, is maybe we can do dinner down at Busboys and Poets and see if we can get that. It's one of the DC classics. So
Yeah. I love that place. I've been there a few times. It's great. um Perfect. Well, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to hang around until 11. But otherwise, thank you all so much for attending the training today. We will be emailing you shortly with a lot of stuff. But if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to reach out to us. So thank you all and enjoy your weekends. See you next week.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Can you guys send me the rollout stuff and I can take a look at it?
Yes. And I'm going to pause the recording now, but I am happy.